have Dan Whitter from the Gallup organization talking about the Gallup Healthways Wellbeing Index. And I was thinking, I didn't have time to check for sure, but I was thinking, Dan, that this is probably the 5th year, which is really amazing how long you guys have been doing this and how long that we've had you coming and talking about it. I think maybe next year we should do like a greatest hits. I don't know. So
happy to be here.
Well, I'm glad that you're here too. So let me remind you, I'm going to introduce Dan in just a second, but let me remind you that if you have questions, type them into the chat box, or if you're crazy brave, you can raise your hand and I will unmute your microphone and you can ask Dan questions. We'll probably save them to the end just because it's the easiest way to go, but do type them in or whatever when they occur to you so we can make sure to capture that information. So let me introduce Dan Whitter. Since 1992, Dan has been specializing in managing research projects designed to measure and enhance customer loyalty and workplace engagement, and with a special emphasis on healthcare and health-related research, including the Gallup Healthways Wellbeing Index. To date, he has directed over $50 million in research for some of the world's best managed organizations, including Stanford Hospital and Clinic, AT&T, Philips Medical System, Starbucks, Fifth Third Bank, Ernst & Young, Pfizer Pharmaceutical, and Pfizer Pharmaceutical. For 17 years, Whitter has used his expertise in survey design, methodology, analysis, business outcomes modeling, report writing, presentation, and results to help leaders better understand their own marketplace, customers, and employees. Whitter's extensive customer and employee research experience has earned him high honors through his career. In 2002, Whitter became the 13th researcher in Gallup's history to earn the Diplomat Analysis certification, a rare distinction among the tenured researchers who created the original research thesis that expands Gallup's body of knowledge. Wowie, Dan. And you have 2 kids. That's pretty darn amazing. Thanks so much for being here. Oh no. And we've got a problem, Houston. And I will edit this out, Dan, so don't stress out about it. I hope you can hear me. We had a little issue prior to, and now we're having the issue again. Rats, Dan, you may want to call in. Just click the button for telephone.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, there you are.
Yeah, hi.
Sorry about that. I don't know. We have gremlins in the universe today.
Yeah, sorry.
So
okay.
Take it away.
All right, thank you, Michaela. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining today. What I am going to do over the course of the next 30 or 40 minutes is walk you through some brand new research that Gallup and Healthways have executed. Also familiarize you with the new Wellbeing Index. We have kind of updated our model. The general thesis of the presentation is what your wellness programs are telling you. And that is zeroing in on the fact that most quote-unquote well-being programs inside of workplaces are very heavily based upon physical wellness, but are not based or considering other elements of well-being. And so I want to talk a little bit about what we know about this and what the benefits are of a more holistic approach towards well-being versus physical wellness alone. So here's what I'll cover. I'll start out with a little bit on public opinion and well-being, and also talk a little bit about U.S. employers and well-being programs. Then I'll take a quick detour into the new Wellbeing 5, which is the new Wellbeing Index model which we've launched in January 2014, along with our 3 classifications of well-being: thriving, struggling, and suffering. Then we'll kind of move into the central part of the presentation where I'll share with you results across a variety of different outcomes that we were able to study recently, looking at physical well-being versus well-being across all the elements. And then we'll leave off with some more longitudinal research, again, that looks at partial versus full well-being against things like disease burden and turnover. Quick note first about my data sources. I'll be referencing Gallup's panel of households throughout most of this. These are close to 60,000 recruited, unpaid American adults nationwide that fit the demography of the nation. Data then do get weighted according to the Census Bureau statistics, just the way the Gallup poll data do, in order to match up the way it ought to match up. And typically we have 15 to 25,000 then respondents in each of our samples, and it allows us to track the same folks over time. I will leverage some Gallup Healthways Wellbeing Index data, 500 randomly selected American adults every night, 175,000 per year. We're at just about 2 million since 2008. So it's a big data set. And then finally a little bit of Gallup poll. So those are my data sources. Let's start with the Gallup poll, talking a little bit about some American opinion on some health perspectives. The question that we asked back in 2004, how serious a problem do you think obesity, cigarettes, alcohol is to society? Extremely serious, very serious, somewhat serious, or not at all serious. Now, back in 2004, 46% thought alcohol was an extremely or very serious issue. And it was in kind of the mid-50s for obesity and for the cigarettes. You fast forward close to 10 years, and what you find is that alcohol, that's that bottom line, is in the same spot, same perceived seriousness among American adults. Cigarettes has climbed. It's gone up about 10 points, now up to 67%. But obesity has really shot up. It has pulled ahead of the pack, and now 81% think that it's extremely or very serious. So there's a real growing consciousness among the American public about the role of obesity and the seriousness of obesity. And that's grown and expanded over the course of the last 10 years. Well, at the same time, turning now back to the panel, 21,000 panel members in this question, we ask a question, please think about your overall life and what is most important to you. You have 100 total points to assign to each of the following 5 areas of your life, depending on how important each of it is to you, and then how do you assign it? Well, as people assign these points, they attribute physical far more so than community, twice as much as what we call purpose, much more so than financial, and social just a little bit less than that. I'll get back into greater detail on these 5 elements here in a minute. But the point of the slide is that physical well-being is something that is considered to be the most important thing. It's the thing that people think about the most and associate most closely with well-being generally. They tend not to think of these other elements nearly as much. Turning now to some recent RAND research, some of you may be familiar with the RAND Health, the Workplace Wellness Program study. This was a big survey of U.S. employers. What RAND concluded was that about half of American employers execute some form of wellness programs and about half do not. So about 1 out of 2 are executing something. Of those employers, though, that are executing some sort of program, the overwhelming majority have to do with physical wellness. So you've got nutrition, you've got some form of HRAs, weight management's a big one, smoking cessation's a big one. Those are kind of the major culprits that we see popping up over and over again. Very little dedicated to things that are outside of the physical domain. So that's where American employers are focusing their time, and that makes sense given that that's what most Americans are thinking about when it comes to these sort of issues. They don't consider beyond the physical very much. So we'll plaintively pose the question, is physical wellness really all we should be concerning ourselves with? I'm guessing, based upon the title of today's talk, that you're already able to figure out what my answer is. but let me move forward and give you some evidence to support my position. Starting first again with a little bit of a detour to talk about the new well-being index. For those of you that have joined these in the past or that have just seen or read about the well-being index, you're familiar with the left-hand side of this slide. The original model had 6 domains of well-being derived from a 55-question survey instrument. That's the big national poll that we've done, the 2 million interviews over a 6-year span. So we had life evaluation, we had emotional health, we had physical health, we had healthy behaviors, smoking, healthy eating, exercise. We had work environment well-being, supervisory relationships, using strengths. And we had what we call basic access, which was healthcare, community satisfaction, money for basic needs. The model now has been restructured around the 5 elements of well-being. So it's now inspired by the book Well-Being, the 5 Essential Elements by my colleagues Jim Harder and Tom Rath, and has drawn upon many of the individually manageable metrics that are found inside of that book, as well as many of the items that were a part of the original well-being index. So the new tool is kind of a merged hybrid of the two, now anchored around the 5 elements of well-being. We still have kind of an overall or outcomes category where life evaluation and a lot of the daily emotions still exists, but those don't really map to any given element. They're sort of outcomes. The 5 elements themselves are what we call purpose, and that's liking what you do each day and being motivated to achieve your goals. Social, which is having supportive relationships and love in your life. Financial, which is managing your economic life to reduce stress and increase security. That was a little bit more about living within your means and managing your income than.
There you are.
And then community, liking where you live, feeling safe, having pride in your community. Hello, can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you now. We lost you after sort of living within your means, but now you're back.
Okay, so with physical, it's my only point was with physical, it's a combination of physical health and healthy behaviors from the old well-being index, and then we had community, which is liking where you live, feeling safe, and having pride in your community. So those are the new elements of well-being in our new tool. So across the U.S., we can then categorize people into 3 different buckets: thriving, struggling, or suffering, across each of these 5 elements. So these are empirically derived cutoffs. So I'll go ahead and drop these all in. If you're thriving, it means you have lots of it. It doesn't mean you don't have room to improve, but it means you have lots of it. You have high levels of well-being in that particular element. If you're suffering, it doesn't mean you can't get worse, but it does mean you have low levels of well-being. And we study this by differentially examining how people execute on certain high-level outcomes that are of interest to employers and communities. Define the best cutoffs between the 3. So you find big differences between people that are thriving and suffering, for example, after you control for all the demographics in the background, across a wide variety of things, including performance in the workplace, absenteeism from the workplace, healthcare utilization, safety in the workplace, and turnover. And this is what it looks like. You know, about roughly 1/3 to 2/5 of Americans thriving in any of the given elements, and then the suffering percentage is going to range from 12% to 24%, depending on which one we're looking at. That's kind of the breakdown. Well, if we take a look across all of the U.S., then here's what it looks like. 28.5% of American adults, and this is as of December 2013, 21,000 panelists. 28.5% of adults are thriving in 0 elements, not thriving in any. 21.6% are thriving in 1 element. You can kind of go down the stairs until you hit just 7.3% that are thriving in all elements. And the 4.3% that are thriving in physical only, that's in the little red box that's floating there. Those two on the right are the ones that I'm really going to zero in on and examine. So it's only about 1/8 of all American adults. About 4% are thriving in physical but nothing else. About 7% are thriving across all of the elements. And my interest is in looking at the differences between the two and see what benefits you get from thriving in all the elements versus physical alone. Well, sticking with the panel, 16,000 panel members in the sample, 680 of them thriving in physical only compared to close to 1,800 that are thriving across all 5 elements. And again, our data are weighted to Census Bureau statistics, and now we're controlling for all demographics in the background. Well, starting with hardship, the question we ask is, thinking generally, are you always, usually, sometimes, rarely, or never able to bounce back fully after illness, injury, or hardship? This is something that people don't often think about when they think of outcomes, but it's a really important one. It's an important one to communities, it's an important one to households, and it's an important one to businesses. For those that are thriving in physical only, again, both groups are thriving in physical only, but for the ones on the left-hand side that are only thriving in physical, 51.5% will report that they're always able to fully bounce back after illness, injury, or hardship. Whereas those thriving in all 5 elements report that 70% of the time. So you get a 36% bump, 36% more likely to report full recovery after hardship than those thriving in physical alone. So again, not just about the physical. If you have all, there's a synergistic effect that benefits us. Next one to look at is adaptability. This is also a very important, especially to businesses. Businesses going through change management, getting a new boss, reorganization. The question is, thinking generally, are you always, usually, sometimes, rarely, or never able to adapt well to change? Well, if I'm thriving in physical only, just 16% of the time am I always reporting always able to adapt well to change. That jumps all the way up to 36% when I'm thriving across all 5 elements. So adaptability, more than twice as likely to have high levels of adaptability when thriving across all of the elements. How about charitable donations? That's not the only form of giving, but it's an important form of giving. And again, have you donated money to charity in the last 12 months? 72% among those who are thriving in physical alone compared to 89% who are thriving in all 5 elements. Those 17 percentage points represent a 23% more likely to have donated to charity. And volunteerism. Volunteerism too, 43% more likely to have volunteered in the last year among those who are thriving across all elements. 49% jumps up to just shy of 71%. Well, what about more hard metrics that are relevant to a business? Employees now looking at missed work days during the past 30 days. For how many days did poor health keep you from doing your usual activities? We convert this to actual unplanned missed work days. It's about a 3-to-1 ratio. And both of these groups are thriving in physical. So these are both groups that have high levels of physical health. And yet the group that's thriving across all of the elements only miss 1.9 days per year of work due to unplanned poor health, compared to 3.2 days per year for those that are thriving in physical alone. So even with something that's directly related to health and absenteeism associated with it, if you're thriving across all the elements, it's a big difference. You're 68% more work is missed per year among those that are thriving in physical alone compared to those that are thriving in all 5 elements, about 2/3 more. How about safety? It's another one that people don't think about too often, but really should, because workers' comp claims, of course, can add up to big dollars for organizations. We ask, in the last 12 months, were you involved in any accident while at work where you had to file for a compensation claim? Well, for those that are, and again, both groups are physically fit, but those that are thriving in physical only are 3 times more likely to have filed a workers' comp claim in the last year than those that are thriving across all 5 elements. So a very substantial difference there. And then finally, likelihood to move, to change jobs. The question is, if the job market improves in the next 12 months, I will look for a job with a different organization. Thriving in physical only, 39% say yes, compared to 7% thriving in all 5 elements. So I'll come back to a little more turnover data here in just a minute. So, you're 5 times more likely to be looking around for a new job if you're thriving in physical, but not any of the other elements, compared to thriving across all of them. Very big difference, with very big replacement costs associated with that. Let me turn now. Utilization goes up, so healthcare costs increase, and we're able to dollarize that using some good secondary research that we leverage. And what we find is that of those that are thriving in 5 elements, if we go back 1 year later and look at their total annual healthcare utilization as a function of the disease burden, well, it goes up it's substantially lower than what it is among those on the left-hand side of the chart, where they're thriving in none of the elements. The red line across the top are for those people that are above the age of 45. The blue line cutting through the bottom are for those under the age of 45. Of course, healthcare utilization goes up with age. Otherwise, all the other demographics are controlled for. So, again, the more elements that we are thriving in, the lower the healthcare utilization that we have from poor health 1 year later. We also look at this same group now just with new onset disease burden. What did they add that they didn't have at the baseline? Again, as we look at the baseline, we look at the people that are thriving across all 5 elements of well-being. That's the right-hand side chart. And then we looked at the same people 1 year later and looked at the new chronic conditions that they've added. Have you had a heart attack? Have you added high blood pressure? Have you become obese? Have you gained diabetes? Have you added high cholesterol? Is it something new that you didn't have before? Those thriving across all the elements at the baseline 1 year later have added. They're all a year older, after all. About $1,600 for that group in new onset disease burden. But for those that are thriving across none of the elements, it goes up to $2,400 in new healthcare costs from new onset disease burden 1 year later. And then finally, actual turnover habits. I showed the intent to leave slide a few slides back. Here's the percent that have actually switched jobs 1 year later. So we look at the baseline, we go out 12 months, find out who's actually changed roles, either voluntarily or involuntarily. And again, with those that are thriving across all the elements, it's less than half the rate of turnover than those that are thriving in none of the elements. And so the replacement costs are going to be more than double among those with the lowest levels of well-being. Well, so where does all of this lead us? I'll leave off with a handful of what I would consider kind of guiding principles for successful well-being intervention programs, and then we can open up to any questions that anybody has. When organizations think about interventions, it's usually very program specific, very program centric. What this is building the foundation for a successful implementation of those programs, the things that really need to be in place for that to ever get off the ground. So point number 1, it is all very data-based, but point number 1 is we need to have a very strong and sustained voice from leadership. And by strong and sustained voice, what I'm talking about is flooding the zone, constantly talking about the importance of well-being to the organization that drives home certain points. So the first point is that This is something that's important to us. Point number 2 is that this is who we are now. This is our identity. And point number 3 is that this is never, ever going to go away. This is now a permanent state for our workplace culture, that we are an organization that cares about and pursues high well-being. And it's something that leadership needs to talk about all the time. Not just once a year, not just once in a while, but all the time. You have to have a strong and sustained voice from leadership. The second one, kind of a corollary to the first one, is a shared and consistent definition of what exactly it is that we mean by well-being. So it's one thing to talk about it, but if you have leaders, either of a community or an organization, that are referencing well-being in different ways, you're going to have a hard time gaining traction. Everybody has to be singing off the same song sheet when it comes to well-being. They have to be describing it and defining it and talking about it the same. That's a very, very important element. Otherwise, you're going to have a hard time gaining traction, because it's going to create confusion inside of your internal marketplace. So a shared and consistent definition of what's meant by well-being. Number 3 is use the bully pulpit. Again, whether it's a community or an organization, leaders have a chance to set policy, for one thing. Whether it's cutting off dessert that gets catered into lunch meetings, or posting the nutritional information in the cafeteria, you know, financial incentives for maintaining certain health standards via your HRA, or reimbursement for participating in the fitness center. All that stuff's good, but it's also leading by example. You know, showing up for the 5K or participating in the community volunteerism effort. Leaders have an opportunity to directly influence this stuff and indirectly influence it by setting a good example. And I think that's a very important element. Number 4 is employees need to sense that leadership authentically cares about their well-being. And closely related to that is they need to feel that employers care about the well-being of their family members. So, and this is another one that we've pretty closely studied. It's one thing to make a business case for well-being, and you can certainly do it, and say this is important to us because it saves us X amounts of dollars every year in presenteeism, it saves us through reduction in absenteeism, it lowers our replacement cost of turnover, etc. But that's not going to be especially compelling to a workforce. What's compelling to a workforce is feeling like you authentically care about their well-being. That had better be a part of the message. That had better come through. And there's an additive benefit in feeling like we care about the family members too. So the more that things can involve the family members, either in added financial incentive to have family members who are not employees participate in the HRA, and if they maintain good health, you get an extra chunk of dough in your flexible spending account, or just on the more community or social level, having events that are planned that include the family members, have physical fitness or other or investment-based workplace seminars where the family members are invited. The more that you can fold the family members in, the better off you are, and the more that you can make employees feel that this is something we really care about in you personally, the more effective that the intervention will be. Number 4, yes, I think you've got the point from the slides that I've shown, is establish and execute programs that hit all 5 elements of well-being, not just the physical. Going back to that RAND survey slide that I showed earlier, about half of U.S. employers have some kind of well-being programs, but the overwhelming majority are based on physical wellness. Well, you can and you should zero in on physical wellness. That's important. It makes a big difference in a lot of different ways. But you are leaving untapped potential, unrealized potential, uncapitalized potential sitting out there if you ignore the other four elements. The more that you include interventions that embrace and address the other four elements, the better the return on your investment is going to be. And oh, by the way, it'll also include the chances that people are going to authentically think that you care about their well-being. So go after all five. Don't just go after physical. You'll leave a lot of untapped potential if you do. And then finally, the last point is to evaluate the effectiveness of your programs. Regardless of what programs you initiate, be it, let's say, smoking cessation, or relax the back, or biggest loser, or physical fitness, or nutrition, or any, or yoga, any of the other things you can think of that you're going to roll out inside of your organization. Well, we can empirically study among participants what the tangible effects are in terms of the overall change in well-being over time and the overall change in outcomes over time. So evaluate it. It's remarkable to me, even among employers that do programs, how little evaluation of the programs is actually occurring. You can study programs, there's always going to be people that could stand to gain from them that are not in them, and for the best programs that you have, do more of them. For the programs that aren't working, I'd stop it. Stop wasting your time and money, both yours and the employees. So that's the conclusion of my slides. I'll just wrap up here, and then we can, with a little bit of a pitch. There is lots of free and available data at healthways.com and at gallup.com. And healthways.com, we have now just released our State of American Wellbeing report. You come in and you register. All you do is put in your email address and your name, and then you can download it for free. That's looking at all the states and cities and congressional districts, along with long-term patterns and a lot of analysis of the results. We also on Gallup.com are putting out several well-being related articles every single week. It's constantly putting out new content. You don't need to sign up for anything. You don't have to pay for anything. You can just hit the site and navigate around on our well-being page and find lots of useful information. So I encourage you to go and look at this for lots of free additional resources on well-being. And otherwise, that's what I've got for today, and I think we can go ahead and open it up for any questions that anybody has.
Awesome, Dan. Thanks so much. I think you did an awesome job, and I think there were several pieces, particularly that one slide, where I think most people in worksite wellness could take it and print it off and stick it on a wall somewhere for everybody to see. So please do type in your questions. Are the slides available? Yes, they are, or they will be very shortly. So yeah, they'll be on HP Live, so hang in there. Back in the beginning, you were showing the graph with the 0 people who are thriving in none of the 5, all the way down to the people who are thriving in all of the 5. And then you showed the one showing the increase in concern about obesity. My first thought, yep, there you were. My thought was, can you tell, is there any way to know chicken and the egg? Because I sort of wonder, are people really concerned, or is the media telling them that they should really be concerned? Is there any way to know that?
Well, I certainly you can. That's a good question. You can look at changes that have occurred in public perceptions around this stuff over the years. Just the word well-being. If you go back to the beginning of the Well-Being Index, it got built in 2007. It got launched on January 2nd, 2008. And well-being was not a word that was used a lot. When you go in and talk to people about well-being, they'd look at you funny. They wouldn't necessarily know what you were talking about, or if it did resonate, it almost always was associated with either physical wellness or happiness. Those were kind of the big two. That has changed, and it's changed in a noticeable way. It's still kind of out there. The media still likes to use, happiest city, most miserable city, that kind of thing. We put out our city rankings, which we bristle at. We wish that they wouldn't, but that's what they do. But with large audiences, the notion of a more comprehensive, more holistic definition of well-being is something that is much more deeply rooted than it used to be. In the case of obesity specifically, that obviously, this slide is a great illustration of it. It has pulled away from the pack, pulled away even from smoking, as a serious health issue, and so this is something that people really get, and they should, because obesity has continued to climb over the course of our measurement. America has added over 2 percentage points of obesity since 2008 through 2013. And that's despite all the notoriety around it now. So it gets talked about a great deal, and that no doubt is driving something like this. I think that probably drives it more than the other way around. But despite the increased notoriety, it's not slowing the rate with which obesity is going up, at least among adults, and that's a scary thing.
Yeah, for sure. And I thought the other really interesting thing for people in worksite-based health promotion is that people who have 0 of those 5 are 2 times more likely to leave, and then you have all the cost associated with training a new person, finding a new person and training a new person, and that really ought to be, that ought to be a significant concern. And motivator to employers to not do the fitness thing, but to do the comprehensive well-being as you're talking about, because that there it is in black and white 2 times. I think is really amazing. Actually, it was a little more than 2 times.
Yeah, and that's this one right here. And this was actual change behavior. So not stated intent to go looking for a job, but across 5,500 employed panelists nationwide, we went back and we looked a year later, and those that were not thriving across any elements of the well-being, more than twice as likely to have actually switched jobs, either through voluntary or involuntary means, than those that are thriving across all. And that's very consistent. People with high well-being are more likely to be engaged in their workplaces. Gallup defines engagement very specifically through 12 psychological needs, and that the engagement in turn is very closely related to a wide variety of specific business outcomes, including turnover, and the well-being feeds right into that. And so the people with low well-being are a lot more likely to have low levels of engagement, and they're a lot more likely to leave and go find something else to do. And the replacement cost associated with that gets very, very big in a short amount of time for larger employers, and even for the small employers. It's no joke when you have to deal with people leaving and have to spend the time and resources to find somebody new, to onboard them, to ramp them up and get them going. So well-being matters, and of course, again, this was controlling for all of the demographics: age, gender, income, education, region, and marital status were all controlled for in this analysis. Over 5,000 working Americans. Wow,
that is amazing. Craig, you asked a question, and I kind of don't understand it. I'm going to try unmuting your microphone and see if you can just ask. You there, Craig?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear? You can hear me?
Yep, can hear you.
Yep.
Oh, that's weird. I thought we had no voice. I was just saying, you suggest that obesity is a health issue, but isn't it really a disease issue? Because obesity is not correlated to health; it's correlated to disease, where other factors are correlated to health.
Well, I think that you could. I think you could easily argue either one. Yes, many people, myself included, consider obesity to be a part of disease burden. Some health experts exclude obesity from disease burden. They put it into a different category. It can be a chronic condition, but it's not a disease. I think it belongs. I think it belongs that. But whether you call it a part of a disease burden or not, whether you think it's a disease or not, it most certainly is related to health. The relationship between obesity and a wide variety of other physical health outcomes, including heart attack, hypertension, diabetes.
Those are all diseases, though.
Pardon me?
Those are all diseases. It's negatively correlated to health.
Well, sure. Right. I mean, it's positively correlated to all.
Hey, Craig, I hope you can hear me. I'm going to unmute you, or I'm going to mute you. Duh.
Yeah, I'm back.
Okay. I think we're still missing Dan.
That's kind of important to have him.
Oh,
There you are,
Can
Dan.
you-
Sorry. Yep, we can hear you.
can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, sorry, I can't tell when you lose my voice. Look, just to reiterate the point, whether you consider obesity to be a disease or not, and I think it belongs in the category of disease burden along with many other health officials.
I guess but that's not really.
It most certainly is a part of any health equation. Anything that we would call health has got to include an assessment of whether you're normal weight or not.
Sorry about that, Craig.
I'm sorry.
That's all right. Sorry about that, Craig. If you could type that question, or maybe you can follow up with Dan afterwards. I was having trouble with your microphone.
Yeah, I couldn't hear either.
Oh well, technology is great when it works. Let's see. Here's a question from Deb. Does career well-being fall into purpose now? Not sure what that means. It seems much broader and harder for employees to focus on. Any suggestions?
Yeah.
Okay. So
That's a good question. The attendee is obviously familiar with well-being, the 5 essential elements.
Okay. That makes
and
sense.
associated research. And with that one, the 5 elements were community, physical, financial, social, and what we call it career. Career has since been renamed to purpose. All 5 of these are statistically convergent with the original 5 that were talked about in the book, but they're all a little different because the tool now is kind of a merged form of the two, the well-being index and well-being finder. What we used to call career is now called purpose. It is asked, I mean, these are questions that are more relevant to workers, but they're also by design questions that can be asked of everybody. And that's really what we wanted. We wanted to get away from having questions that were worker-centric only, that were by definition reduced base. We wanted questions that could be asked of everyone because your career, you can have a career that's outside of the formal workforce. It be you a student or a stay-at-home parent or house manager or a retiree, you've got a career. And so what we're calling that now is purpose. It is about liking what you do each day, and using your strengths. So are the things that you're spending your time on, are they aligned with the things that you do best? But it's also about things like having a leader who makes you feel optimistic about the future, or having goals that you're pursuing in life. So those are all things for purpose. They're certainly actionable, whether you're inside of a workplace or not. They are not meant to replace Gallup's employee engagement model. They do bump up against it and overlap with it a little bit. But this is a kind of a broader form of well-being that can be applied to workers, but shouldn't be looked upon as a replacement of the engagement model.
Thanks. That does make sense. And it really does. Seems like a really smart way to go, because whether formal job independent, it's really about having a purpose.
Right.
Let's
Yep.
see. Pat is wondering, I find it interesting that only 5% or less of wellness programs in workplaces are focused on stress management, when research shows that anywhere from 75 to 90% of doctor's office visits, illnesses, disease are directly related to stress. Any comment would be welcome on how do we correct this um, with a more focus towards well-being. That is kind of amazing.
Well, yeah, that's a good observation. Yeah, hailing back now to the RAND workplace wellness program study, and yeah, I mean, stress is a part of it. There's lots. The interesting thing is though that there's a lot of ways to manage stress that don't have anything to do with workplace interventions. That have a lot to do with well-being that's taking place outside of the workplace. So that includes things like volunteerism. It includes things like participating in family events. It includes participating in things like community runs or walks, which are all things, incidentally, that employers can and should be playing a leading role in getting their employees to do, but that are not necessarily things that are directly related to stress. But these are all things that have been statistically proven to lower stress and improve positive daily affect. Things like enjoyment and smiling and laughter and happiness that are not necessarily doing meditation or yoga or other things inside of or just stress management courses inside of the workplace, that are kind of meant to sort of directly influence the stress. Think of the things that indirectly influence the stress. There's a lot out there that can really make a big difference that, oh, by the way, are also a part of the well-being paradigm, that are all, also a part of that model that we should be addressing. So it's a good thought, and it's an important reminder that these 5 elements do not exist in isolation from one another. They most certainly influence one another. You can kill more than one bird with a single stone, and the stress management is a good example of that. But with what Rand was doing here is they're just looking at programs that are directly meant to address stress, and consequently, it looks like a pretty small chunk of the total. But there's lots of ways that you can affect stress that are outside of the objectively defined range with which Rand is executing its inquiry, and that's a really important point, I think.
Yeah, as you were talking, I was thinking, so what you're really talking about is kind of being engaged in their life or community or family or whatever. So some of those work sites might very well be, have a big bunch of people going to a 5K as a group or whatever, and they certainly wouldn't have listed that as stress management.
Yeah, and the other one, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention it, is engagement itself. We've done, obviously Gallup has studied employee engagement for a long time. Over 25 million employees have been through Gallup's Q12 instrument. So this is psychological needs now. It's clarity around what you get paid to do when you walk in the door. It's having your natural aptitudes aligned with your job role. It's getting routine and regular recognition. It's feeling cared about. It's having a mentor. It's having your opinions count, and more. Okay, those are the kind of psychological needs we're talking about. And those most certainly have an effect. The people that are highly engaged, that are seeing and feeling, the lower the well-being. It influences your emotional health, including a spike in stress. It influences your physical health, including lower back pain. It lowers, it reduces the way you think about and evaluate your life, and it also has an influence on your overall job satisfaction. But if you're that's across all workers, but when you differentiate it based upon engagement level, highly engaged employees, even with long commutes, do not see an erosion in their well-being, and that includes stress levels. So if you're going to a workplace where you have all those psychological needs being met, not only is your stress lower, but your stress remains lower even in the presence of a long commute. On the other hand, if you have high levels of disengagement, in other words, you don't experience all that stuff in the workplace. You got a lousy manager, and you never get recognized, and you're a wrong fit for your job. You don't know what you get paid to do. Then not only are you going to have higher stress to begin with, but as your commute time goes up, your stress is going to go through the roof. Your well-being really goes down precipitously, and your stress goes way up. And so commute time affects well-being, including stress. But as you layer engagement on top of the commute time, the engagement either pretty much completely mitigates the commute time's effect, or it can amplify it and make it still worse. And so it's interesting to see the effects that occur between those different elements.
Great. Well, I think we're out of questions, which really works out well because we're sort of out of time. Let's see. Craig wondered if he could connect with you, and boy, are you good. There is your phone number and email address. So, yeah, Craig, please.
Yeah, you can just
do.
email me. We
Super.
have some questions.
Yep, that's awesome. Well, Dan, thanks so much. Any forecasts for the future, like what you might be talking to us about next year?
Well, we'll see what the year holds. Health insurance is a hot topic right now. Go out to Gallup.com because every month we're updating change in status of health insurance. We'll continue to track all the physical health metrics, of course, but as we've rearranged our model, we'll start putting more and more things out on social well-being and community well-being that we haven't examined in the past. That'll really be, I think, a nice, interesting addition to what we have historically measured and reported upon. So just keep an eye on it. When I come back next year, I'll spend a little more time talking about the 5 elements.
Great. Thank you so much for being here. Have a wonderful weekend. I hope maybe you see the sun, at least for a little bit.
I think it's peeking out right now.
Yay, go look at it. Have a great weekend, everyone.